So for anyone who isn't sure where Cyprus is, it's the most eastern Mediterranean island. It is close to the other major harbours of Castellorizo and Rhodes. So they were the three most important harbours in the eastern Mediterranean during antiquity. And you can see that Cyprus, whilst it's close to Greece and has very old Greek roots, it's also very close to Turkey or Turkiya, to the Middle East and to Egypt. And it looks like the first people who came to Cyprus were in fact farmers from the Middle East and then the Phoenicians. And like the Greek islands to the slightly to the west, they were also conquered by, Cyprus is also conquered by Greeks and Romans and Franks and Byzantines and British. And like the Dodecanese islands, which is Rhodes and up the coast there north along the Turkish coast, it was also conquered by the Ottoman Empire. But Cyprus is a little bit different because it was also ruled by the Egyptian pharaohs for a while. And that's what makes Cyprus and why it has just such a wealth of historical treasures, because pretty much anyone who's anyone in the entire region of the Mediterranean has spent some time building and colonizing and leaving their influences in Cyprus. So that's the other thing that makes Cyprus a little bit different from other from other Mediterranean islands and from Greek islands, is that it's got a divided UN buffer zone. It's the only remaining European divided capital, and it doesn't look like it's going to change anytime soon. When the Greeks inadvisedly launched a military coup in Cyprus in 974, the Turkish government responded and invaded, and they took the territory, which they've called the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. It's a self-declared republic. No one acknowledges its existence except the Turkish government. And the UN has created a buffer zone that they patrol, and it goes right through the middle of the capital of Cyprus, Nicosia. The part in the north, it's not really north, it's actually sort of, well, I suppose it's north, but it's also eastern, and it's easy to cross across these borders, but you have to be careful if you're entering into the Republic of Cyprus through the Turkish part, because if you don't exit through the Turkish part, then you're not considered to have gone into the Republic of Cyprus legally. So sometimes I fly through Istanbul into Ergin Airport in the Turkish side and then out again that side. The British left 2 bases in Cyprus, and it was they who created this green line, the buffer zone, as it's called. And our senior tour leader, Eleni, was born in Famagusta, which is now in the Turkish side. And like many people, when the invasion occurred, she fled to the southern side, and she lives now in Nicosia. The Turkish, our biblical Cyprus tour crosses right across the island. It starts over in Famagusta and Salamis and goes all the way across to Paphos. But the tour that we're going to, or the area that we're talking about today, is really Western Cyprus. And that part of the island comes from Larnaca over to the Achaemenid Peninsula and up to the northwest coast, just almost there to that UN buffer zone. So that's the area that I'm going to talk about today. And if you've got any questions about crossing the border or the peculiarities of Cyprus, please let me know in the chat at the end. So I wanted to start today with Larnaca, which is where you're most likely to fly in. Now, Paphos also has an airport, and 20% of its flights are from London and from Gatwick. So you can get to Paphos reasonably cheaply from those destinations. But for most people, it's a lot cheaper to fly in for some reason through Larnaca than it is through Paphos. So Larnaca has the largest airport. It's built on the site of a couple of ancient cities, and its name comes from larnax, so a box that holds bones. And in this case, it's Lazarus, the guy that Jesus resurrected from the dead after 3 days. And once he'd done his resurrecting bit, he moved to Larnaca, which was then called Ancient Kition, and he became the bishop of Larnaca, and that church that you can see there is the cathedral Lazarus Cathedral, and his bones are buried in a Larnax in Larnaca, which is how it has its modern name. Larnaca is got a charming old town. It's got an old Turkish quarter, which is lovely. It has a little good museum, and it's got high quality restaurants and accommodation, and some nice beaches as well, especially along the promenade there that you can see in the top left. But we are headed west, and we're headed west along what was the old Roman coastal route along the headlands, all the way from Larnaca to Salamis. So we're going to head to the Episcopi region, which is just it's west of Larnaca, and it's a little bit west of the second biggest city in Cyprus, which is Limassol. This is an area of white cliffs, pebbly and sandy beaches, and it's a site of a very important city in antiquity because it was on a major trade route to the Mediterranean, which was called Curium. And it seems to have been settled by the Mycenaean Greeks in the 12th century BC. And like all of Cyprus's big archaeological sites, there's an awful lot going on these sites. So you can find Hellenistic ruins, Roman ruins. You can see sites influenced by Phoenicians, Persians, early Christian architectural finds. It's really why we have an archaeologist guide who comes with us and just helps us understand what's important to see and what we're actually seeing, because otherwise in Cyprus and in Greece particularly, so many sites are jumbles of 4 or 5 different civilizations building on top of each other and destroying the one before it. I like the structures at either end of this site the best, and I've got to admit that I know there are some fantastic ancient, Byzantine, Hellenistic, whatever ruins, but I like the Roman mosaics, and I love the House of Gladiators at the far end of the site, just because they are astonishing gladiator mosaics. The people mostly like to see the ancient theatre. This is a Hellenistic theatre, and it's used now for all kinds of international festivals. If you look around the back of it, you can see that most of it isn't old. It's been renovated, but it's still a very impressive theatre. Kurian takes quite a while to see. It's a big site to walk around, but around Kurian itself, you get the beach below. So paragliders launch off the top of ancient Kurian down to the beach here. Around it, you've got the sanctuary of Apollo Hyatus. You've got an ancient stadium. There's a museum, some other ruins. And we make sure we go down and have a seafood lunch on the beach. And because our tours are in fall or autumn and spring, sometimes it's scorching hot, sometimes it's mild, but we always build in time for a swim as well in this lovely part around Episcopi. Now, if we move further west on our way to Paphos, we get to a part of the countryside called Aphrodite's Rock. It's really a story about why this is the island of love. Cyprus is the island of Aphrodite. And here on this little beach that you can see, Aphrodite is believed to have come naked, carried ashore by sea foam, and then made the island, grew up here on this island. And it's called Petra to Rumio, and it features these giant rock formations, very pebbly shoreline, beautiful azure waters. And the legend says that if you swim in these waters, Aphrodite will gift you eternal beauty. And because today we're talking about Western Cyprus, we're going to keep heading along the coastal route past lots of little villages until we reach Paphos. Paphos was on the ancient Mediterranean trade route. It was built by the last Cypriot king, the king of Paphos, Nicholas. The whole of Paphos has been a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 1980. You just trip over ruins everywhere you walk. And in fact, along the shoreline up to this big mall, the Mall of the Kings, the Avenue of the Kings, And spanning for miles on either side of the big archaeological park down by the harbour is an enormous underground city, the city of Paphos. In this, all around this area, you'll find catacombs and Egyptian, Greek, Roman, Byzantine, and medieval objects and sites if you just poke around a little bit. I want to start at the harbour in Paphos. This is an area called Paphos. It's a lovely place to stay. Despite its fairly small size, which stretches for just over a mile from Posidonus Avenue to the medieval castle of Paphos, Paphos harbour offers lovely views of the Mediterranean Sea, and it reminds you of a sort of a Greek harbour town. There's a lovely long promenade with bars and cafes, and at the western tip, which you'll see in the top right-hand corner there, at the western tip, there's fish restaurants and Paphos Fort or Paphos Castle. It was built as a fortress by the Byzantines, but then it was used as a prison and as a warehouse during medieval times up until the 17th century. There's a coast path that stretches here westward, but immediately in front of the western end of the harbour is the UNESCO World Heritage Site of Nea Paphos, or New Paphos. This city was founded by the last king of Old Paphos in the late 4th century BC. Later on, it became a very important Hellenistic and Roman city. It was the hub of all culture and trade and religion in the area. It became the capital of Paphos for 300 years. It was ruled in the Hellenistic period by the Ptolemaic dynasty of Egypt. But by the 4th century AD, Cyprus was rapidly becoming Christianized, and many temples were destroyed, and those stones were used to build basilicas. There are a few must-see mosaics here. Soon after you enter the site, and you can see this in the top left and the bottom right-hand pictures, you can see that a lot of this is just uncovered. And on the bottom right there, you can see a beautiful uncovered mosaic of Theseus killing the Minotaur in the labyrinth in the palace of Knossos. That mosaic is part of an enormous administrative Roman complex that the Roman proconsul lived in and worked in, and I'll talk about him again a bit more in a minute. Immediately to the right of that mosaic of Theseus and the Minotaur, there's the House of Aeon. That's the picture in the middle up the top there. That's Aeon is the god of eternity, and these are just examples of really extravagant, wealthy Roman villas whose floors have been preserved somehow. And in the bottom, in the middle picture, you'll see another mosaic. That's the House of Dionysus. Dionysus is the god of wine, and there are lots of wine god mosaics, but there's also mythological scenes, hunting scenes, Scylla, sea dragons. And they're all there's a raised walkway right around the villa, so that you look down onto these astonishing, enormously long, 20 feet long mosaics of in the House of Dionysus. So I think these mosaics are the premier part of Nea Paphos, but there are lots of other things to see here as well. There's an Asclepion, a Roman Odeum, an agora, a Byzantine castle, a basilica, and probably the most recent monument is the British Lighthouse as well. If we head another couple of miles to the west, still along the shore of Paphos, we come to another UNESCO World Heritage Site, which is an enormous necropolis called the Tombs of the Kings. When the last Cypriot king and all his family committed suicide, the Egyptians took over, and these later on, wealthy officials copied the Egyptian style of burial chambers and built these tombs. And then much later on, early Christians hid from the Romans in them. The tomb structure replicates the ancient Egyptian burial traditions that you find in Alexandria in Egypt. They look like homes with individual chambers, because they believe that the dead should lay while dead in tombs that look like the houses of the living. And while some of them are built to Egyptian traditions, it's fascinating that some of them also have Greek Doric columns, and others look a bit like catacombs that you find carved from solid rock in Italy, like in Rome. And there are 7 major sites that you just wander around, very hot, dry, seaside location. On the slide to the top left now, you can see Panagia Chrysopolitisa, a very important church, and within this archaeological zone you can see St. Paul's pillar. The legend is that St. Paul was flogged here, and then that the Roman proconsul, the guy who lived in that big villa that had the mosaic of Theseus and the Minotaur, that he was converted to Christianity by Paul. And the Pope was here, I think, in 2016, and said that it's a very important site. Our archaeologist scoffs a little because he says that historically the dates don't line up, but it's a very important pilgrim site for Christians. And certainly in our biblical tour, we hang out here as well. But it's just one of the parts that Eleni takes you on in our tour of Old Paphos, because it's it's very close to a hotel. It's close to near Paphos. There's just archaeological zones all over Old Paphos. You can also see down the bottom in the middle picture, that's the catacomb of Agios Solomos. In the middle picture at the right is Coral Bay, about 10 minutes from Paphos, and a little bit further to the west is Peia, the sea caves there. That's the entrance to the Achaemenid Peninsula. There's also a shipwreck around this area, and in the bottom left you can see a picture of the old town of Paphos, and that was taken in December, which shows you that it really is an all-round destination. Now, I don't want to leave Paphos without talking about food for a minute. Excuse some of my blurry photos. I think that metse, whether that's fish or meat metse, shaftalia and Lukanika village sausages, and kleftiko, named after the clay pots made in Cyprus that you cook the lamb in, are all very well done in Paphos. The trick in Paphos is to look for the oldest tavernas and a few of the very high quality seafood restaurants, and to avoid anything that looks particularly touristy. Because if you can find these quality tavernas, the food just keeps coming and coming until you actually have to say stop. It's a fantastic experience. We try and put a lot of time aside for lunch, particularly. We have, going back to our map now, so you can see that we've moved from Larnaca, past Limassol, down to that sandy area of Aphrodite's Beach, across to Paphos, and we're going to move up now to the northwest coast. And we're going to go initially through the mountains, you can see the main road leading up there, and then we'll veer off to the Achaemenid Peninsula. But right now I want to go up that road, because not too far from Paphos is just a gorgeous little village, one of my favorite villages in Cyprus. It's called Kathikas. Kath in Greek is a seat, and this is a sort of a plateau which looks down to the sea towards Paphos and the Achaemenid. There's nothing historically or culturally particularly wonderful about this village. It is just an excellent example of a gorgeous little Cypriot village. It has beautiful stone roads and buildings. It's covered in fruit trees, small gardens, lots of hanging flowering plants. It has a little church, a little village square. You can see some Greek revolutionary heroes, the busts of them, and behind that is a little tiny folklore museum. And there are some very old tavernas here, and the people who are running them now, it's their grandparents who started them. And so we always try to make sure that we pop up to Kathikas, have lunch at one of these old tavernas, very traditional lunch, and then we visit the little winery as well. Vineyards cover all the area around Kathikas, and you can find aubergines and all kinds of vegetables growing in little plots as you walk past these little houses. it's just a lovely spot I thought I wanted to tell you about. If we head now to what many people think is one of the best parts of Cyprus, to the Akamis National Park in the Akamis Peninsula. So beginning at the end of Paya village, not far from Paphos and the sea caves, you can start to see the beginning of the Akamis Peninsula. It's 230 square kilometres of gorgeous natural wonders with coastal terrain, gorges, walking trails, these beautiful crystal clear waters, and some really unique, diverse, often endangered, rare bird, plant and reptile species. This part of Cyprus is old and rich in mythology. Ptolemy described the Akamis Peninsula as a thickly wooded headland cut in two by a mountain range that rises to the north. So it's on the map, on the ancient map. Akamis was the son of Theseus in Greek mythology, but the island, and especially the Akamis Peninsula, belongs to the goddess Aphrodite and her lover Adonis. You'll see her name on most of the landmarks here. You can see in the bottom right-hand corner is the baths of Aphrodite. You need a four-wheel drive to get into the Akamis, and we do a jeep tour with our archaeologist guide because he's also got a passion for not just historical sites but for birds as well. And this is the great migration route from Africa to Europe for birds over the winter. So we also take a boat tour to the Blue Lagoon, and we swim in the Mediterranean water at any time of the year. We hike through the Avgus Gorge. We visit the baths of Aphrodite. And we also visit at Lara Beach. There's a sea turtle sanctuary because these are endangered. So the furthest you can get into the park is the baths of Aphrodite, which is that small waterfall and pool where the goddess is believed to have bathed. Not far from this area are the baths of Adonis, where she also frolicked with her lover. And just a little bit away on the coast, very close to the Blue Lagoon, is the Fontana Amorosa, a small bay of love. So you get to see this is really where Aphrodite enjoyed herself, the Akamis Peninsula. We like to stay in the northeast coast, close to the towns of Polis, Lachi, and Pomos. We particularly like Polis, which is built on the ancient city-state of Marion. There's a tiny museum in Polis. I think it's only 2 rooms. The town has an old Turkish quarter, and it's surrounded, it's walking streets only, and it's surrounded by tavernas. There's not much that happens in these coastal villages up here. There's small sheltered fishing harbours, seafood tavernas, beaches, a few beach bars. It's very relaxing. It's kind of the opposite of the experience that you have by the coast in the southeast corner in places like Ayanapa and Protaras. It's a very, very different kind of Cyprus. I'm showing you the map for the last time today as we're going to move now from the Akamis and the northwest coast, and we're going to move west. Oh, goodness me. We're going to move east into the Troodos Mountains, which is the last part of the Western Cyprus tour that I wanted to talk about today. So we head up into the mountains, and it rises high above the island, and this mountain range is home to ancient villages, there's a lot of UNESCO World Heritage listed churches here, lovely walking trails that are well signposted, and some of the very best wine in Cyprus. There are towering pine forests, dramatic gorges, and waterfalls that define the region. The Troodos Mountains is home to some of Cyprus's most picturesque medieval villages built by the Venetians in the 15th and 16th centuries, hidden in these little forested valleys. And these bridges were once part of an ancient trade route and camel trails, but thankfully there aren't any camels left in Cyprus, and they obviously weren't native. There are lots of agritourism villages in the Troodos Mountains. There's such a pleasure to wander their little alleyways. The village squares often have tavernas and outdoor seating, except in winter, but then there's skiing and Christmas villages. There are a couple of excellent spas that we make use of, some spectacularly good restaurants, lovely 4- and 5-star hotels tucked away into the villages. So hiking, hitting the spas, eating in the best restaurants make this a really interesting and different kind of Cypriot holiday. As you can see, there is more going on in the Troodos Mountains than just food and wine and walking. And while we're having our luxurious stay in the Troodos Mountains, we also go hunting for the painted churches and monasteries that are the UNESCO World Heritage Sites. And it's an adventure just finding them. The first time I went hunting for these churches, I think it was my birthday. My partner didn't want to come, left him in Paphos, and my phone died, so I had no GPS. And it's very hard to read a map while you're driving in these tiny, tiny little narrow villages where there's only just enough room to pass. So I got lost quite a few times. Eventually, I found my first church, and it was locked. So I trudged back up into the village to the local taverna, and of course there's only one, and I asked for the keeper of the key. And a lady brought me this enormous brass key. I took it back down to the church. I put it into the big doors and I turned the key. And I opened up, and these pictures here on the left are what you can see when I opened the door and the church was flooded with light. These are 10th century Byzantine frescoes, and they are hidden in churches, in little villages, and in monasteries throughout the Troodos Mountains. 10 of them are UNESCO World Heritage Sites. So in addition to food and wine, it's the churches and the monasteries of the region that I find really compelling as well. And speaking of wine, touring the vineyards, the wineries, and indulging in wine tasting is a very fun thing to do in this region. And you can follow the various Cyprus Tourism Organization wine routes throughout the region. I like wine, so does our tour guide, Eleni. And we love meeting locals and hearing their stories about how they've created these wineries. And in some areas, they've completely revived the economy of fairly remote mountain valleys. And so we like hanging out in these places and with these locals, and we like drinking their wine, most of which are too small that they can't afford to export it. And in addition to to some of those activities I've talked about so far, there's also a range of artisanal craft, eco-farming and cooking related activities like chocolate making, spoon sweet making and halloumi making up in the mountains. They're all built into our tours because that's how we hang out and have fun with the locals. And they take us into their vineyards and their churches and their orchards and their farms and their kitchens and their workshops. So as I said at the beginning, our tours are about slow travel. I hope you've enjoyed this quick trip through Western Cyprus today. Please do hop onto our website for more resources, including podcasts, or onto our YouTube channel for lots of videos. And of course, we also hope you look onto the website and consider booking one of our tours of Cyprus.